We're going to continue on from Monday because it seemed to bring some response. I got a couple of other people writing me some quotations from Martin Luther King as a response. So and then I've subsequently continued thinking about this whole thing too. So let me read you the other quotations. So one thing King said was, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are smaller compared to the wounds we inflict on our own soul when we look the other way. So society's punishments, that could be in terms of reputation, it could be in terms of imprisonment, it could be in terms of getting beaten or killed or something like that. Yeah, but really saying, and this is somebody who believes in karma, yeah? The whole idea being that when you harm somebody else, you harm yourself. When you benefit somebody else, you benefit yourself. If you don't benefit when you could have, you harm yourself. Yeah, that's what he's saying. Yeah. And it's beautiful words, and I can remember ever since I was a child, because I grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust. So hearing about that and hearing about the people who went along with it and hearing about the people who saved people and resisted, So that it made a deep impression on me when you are able to make a statement even though you may put yourself in danger by doing so. That's something I've been thinking about. Let me read you the other one. I'm going to come back to that theme in a minute. So this was one from his memoir of the Montgomery bus boycott. His book was called Stride Towards Freedom. He is recounting his thoughts and feelings the night that his house had been bombed. The thing is, when Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus, the leaders in the community called for an all-black boycott of the Montgomery bus system. And, tens and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people just stopped riding the bus. And the police, they had a grand jury investigation, and then they arrested, hundreds of people for boycotting riding the bus. Yeah, it was illegal in Alabama to boycott something. I was reading this going, huh? So, and so some of the leaders of the movement were threatened. So his house had been bombed. So King said, I could feel the anger rising when I realized that my wife and baby could have been killed. I was once more on the verge of corroding hatred, and once more I caught myself and said, you must not allow yourself to become bitter. I tried to put myself in the place of certain Montgomery officials. I said to myself, these men are not bad men. They say the things they say about us and treat us as they do because they have been taught these things. From cradle to grave, it is instilled in them that the Negro is inferior. Their parents probably taught them that. The schools they attended taught them that. The books they read, even their churches and ministers often taught them that. And above all, the very concept of segregation teaches them that. The whole cultural tradition under which they have grown teaches them that Negroes do not deserve certain things. So these men are merely the children of their culture. And that kind of, when I hear that, it reminds me of how I dealt with George W. and thinking, if I had been born the son of the senior Bush in that kind of family with that kind of privilege and everything that went on in a moneyed Texan, politically connected family, I probably would have turned out like George W. too, So this is kind of what he's saying here. But I think what he's saying is it requires a lot more than what I was doing in my meditation, because when somebody's systematically putting down a whole group of people with this kind of vile prejudice and hatred, it's, for him to step back and overcome wanting to hate them in return was incredible courage. And that was really what lay behind his nonviolent stance on many things. Now I want to share with you a little bit what I was thinking since I gave that talk on Monday. And I was thinking, why am I so inspired by people like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks? Sometimes even more so than the hagiographies that I read about past great Buddhist masters. When I read the biographies, the hagiographies of the past Buddhist masters, they don't bring me to tears the way King's writings do. Why is that? And so I just thought to share a few thoughts with you, and maybe we have some discussion about this. But one thought is that what King and Parks were doing is the result of incredible spiritual practice. Yeah? And in the hagiographies, well, first of all, a hagiography isn't a biography. It's a glorified biography written in a certain way. And I find that most of them, with the exception of Milarepa's, you don't really get a feeling of who they were as people. You more get a thing of what they studied, who they taught, where they went. But you don't get a sense of who they are as human beings dealing with the same kind of things that we deal with, or dealing with the kinds of things that King and Parks were dealing with. His Holiness does, His Holiness, his whole life as a refugee. And some of my teachers, when they tell their personal stories and how they had to practice in leaving Tibet and what they went through, and especially how His Holiness says, don't hate the communist Chinese, and how Lama Yeshe says he thanks Mao Zedong for teaching him what the real Dharma is. Those kinds of things really resonate in me, because there I can see real human dilemmas and how spiritual practice can be used to overcome very normal and natural afflicted emotions that most people would have in those kind of situations. But most of the hagiographies just don't do it for me. I realize that they do it for other people, and many people find them very, very inspiring. But, to me, Milarepa being able to go inside the horn without his becoming smaller or the horn becoming bigger doesn't inspire me the way this does. Yeah? And I realize that kind of stuff may inspire other people, and it probably does inspire a lot of other people. When I ask myself, well, what in the biographies does inspire me? When I think of Jay Rinpoche going to Urkar and doing 3.5 million prostrations, and I was at that place and I saw the stone where he did it, and there's the imprint of his body on there. Yeah, that I find inspiring because that takes a lot of effort. That takes something that, you have to really believe in something to do 3.5 million prostrations. Yeah. You really do. I mean, otherwise, what are you doing? Yeah. I mean, you can get through 100,000 without believing too much. Yeah? But 3.5 million? I don't think you could get through. Okay? Yeah. I also went to the place outside of Reting where Jay Rinpoche meditated on emptiness, and they say the syllable ah fell from the sky. And that I saw, that there is the syllable ah and Oma Hung in the rocks, not painted on or chiseled on, but the vein of color in the rocks is like that. That I find inspiring. But I think one of the things I'm asking myself is like, it seems to me that in some ways what I find more inspiring is when I see it in practical benefit, to sentient beings. And of course, there's many people who go around and do practical benefit, and they may be manifestations or emanations of bodhisattvas or Buddhas. We don't know that, and of course they don't announce themselves, But I'm wondering, why is it that I see that as so inspiring, whereas the whole practice and everything you have to do in terms of your own private meditation practice, I respect the effort, it inspires the effort in me, but I guess because I don't see the direct benefits, yeah? And so this brings up a whole other issue, which is one I think that comes up in the West a lot, in which people are asked, well, why are you doing so much practice? Why don't you go out and directly benefit somebody? And I've thought about that a great deal, and I know why that isn't the case, and that's because without my spiritual practice, if I attempted to benefit somebody, I would probably do more harm than good. Yeah? And that, if we're really able to become Buddhas, we can benefit in a very extensive way, much more so than we can by doing smaller acts. Yeah. Because, for example, teaching people about karma so that they can refrain from negative actions and do positive actions is actually more beneficial to them than giving them a meal. Yeah, when you think about it, it's good to give people who are hungry food, but they need to be fed before they can listen to the Dharma. But what actually is going to help them long term is if they're able to learn about karma and about generosity and so forth. Yeah. But when somebody teaches you about those things, when somebody teaches that, I don't look and go, wow, how wonderful that is. That really inspires me. Because I think it's when there's some danger to oneself and somebody overcomes that danger or difficulty, that really gets to me. And I think because that really, bodhisattvas, they could be teaching many people, and it's an amazing benefit. But the one bodhisattva who does something where I can see that they're putting themselves in danger or they're overcoming some big personal difficulty, that really gets to me. I think because I'm such a chicken. Yeah, and because I don't have that, those bodhisattvas have clearly equalized and exchanged themselves for others, and I do things that benefit others as long as I'm safe. Yeah. But of course, a real bodhisattva, of course they say you don't give your body away and things like that until you are at the path of seeing, because it's more important to keep your body healthy and safe than to do something that may be inspiring, but it costs you your life and you lose your precious human life. It's, like His Holiness tells I remember I was in Dharamsala when this one Tibetan man set himself on fire in Delhi and ran down the streets. And the Tibetans were calling him a martyr and a hero, and His Holiness said, it's better to live for Tibet than to die for Tibet. Yeah, and I don't admire martyrs. To me, martyrdom is stupid. Yeah, excuse me. But I think it is, yeah. I think living for a cause is more important than dying for it. But of course, King gave up his life, but that's different. I mean, the guy who sets himself on fire knows he's going to die. King doesn't necessarily know that. Okay, so there is some difference there. So I'm kind of rambling a bit, but do you see I'm presenting different thoughts about the same thing from different perspectives? And I'm kind of wondering if any of you have been questioning this whole thing, or have had some of these thoughts from different angles and how that's affecting you.
I've been thinking a lot about it this week, and I think where my mind is right now, because it is under the control of so much, that having someone who is really trying to help the world in this life inspires me to be a better human in this life. When I think about Atisha and I think about Lama Tsongkhapa, who are benefiting beings all the way to awakening, then I can appreciate them at a different level. Martin Luther King inspires me to get my act together in this life to perpetuate the causes for future lives. Lama Tsongkhapa and Shanti Deva inspire me. This is a long journey, kid, and this is how it goes. I can hold both of them as heroes, and because I have a short-term vision of just what today, and then I've got this long-term vision of bodhisattvas and following them. That all these inspirations from what ordinary beings are doing is inspiring this ordinary being to be a little bit above what I think she can do. And the bodhisattva is saying, you're creating the causes to be able to do what we're able to do. So I think they're actually related to it.
Yeah. So you're talking actually about two levels of inspiration. One is when you see people benefiting other people in this life, that inspires you to be a better human being in this life. When you're seeing people benefiting others by spreading the Dharma, such as Tsongkhapa and Atisha and Chandakirti and Shantideva, that inspires you to practice the path so that you can develop your qualities more fully and become a Buddha to enact greater benefit.
I think the ones of this life are creating the causes for me to be able to have a relationship with the bodhisattvas in a different way.
Okay, so admiring the people who benefit others this life helps you to create the causes for having...
For me to be able to be a kind of being that will create the causes, and through that inspiration to be more courageous, be more compassionate, to work with my affliction, to deal with adversity, the kind of mind that Martin Luther King had.
Yeah. Okay, so seeing somebody who benefits others in this life, in the sense that it helps you be a better human being, it also spurs you in your spiritual practice to overcome the hindrances inside yourself that prevent you from acting in that way, and to really be able to actualize the bodhisattva state of mind. Yeah, that's good.
I think our culture is quite different. Like, in the hagiographies, or to me, bring up some of the examples of where the bar is set so high that we don't even want to try. There's the stories that where the kind of the pedal meets the metal, where you're a suffering sentient being who has to overcome something.
Mhm.
You can relate to that, and because the other one's a little harder to relate to.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah.
emotionally connect to it, and you don't see the path that how they got there, and so you just kind of almost disconnect.
Yeah, so the hagiographies, the bar's too high. We see that result. It seems like magic. We're not seeing the path, what they actually did on a day-to-day level to get to that thing. So that may be why it doesn't inspire us so much, whereas somebody who's doing something that is just a little bit out of our reach, but maybe we could get there, seems to inspire us more. Yeah. Yeah.
I think the thing about, well, I just miss Mark. So that's where the tears come from. It's my selfish wanting him to still be here. But the other thing is, so many people have put him on a pedestal. And when we do that, when we make someone into a hero, it kind of goes with what you were talking about.
Yeah.
We can't be like Martin. But
Yeah.
the truth about Martin that you and I have seen and other people our age have seen that he was an ordinary person who had a perfectly comfortable life that decided to step outside of that. And we got to see someone's mental process. When you read his work, you can see what he did to get
Where he got,
ended up.
yeah.
And also, I agree with your statement about Martin wasn't trying to be a martyr. He was trying to help people.
Yep.
The fact that he was killed was just an unfortunate result of other people's, misguided attempts to change things. When people set themselves on fire, it's just simply a tragedy because they haven't really helped.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you're commenting now on how history is making Martin Luther King into some kind of almost godlike person, whereas, those of us who lived at the time he lived saw him as a real human being. And when you actually read his writings, you saw how he had to work with his own mind, and that's what is so inspiring. Yeah, seeing how somebody has to work with their own mind to get where they got.
And it's important
Yeah.
to keep him as a human being,
Yeah.
not a superhero.
Right. The importance of keeping him as a human being, not making him into something. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of the woman that climbed the flagpole and took down the Confederate flag.
Yeah.
The people that I see demonstrating with the Black Lives Matter, and the people that are, hanging from bridges to stop. There's especially in the youth today, there's so much, because of the groundwork that, King had and many others had laid for them, they're able to go forward with this. Maybe 50 years from now, nobody's going to remember this woman's flagpole, but her result of that was of great benefit.
Yeah.
And I think too that I've never read the hieroglyphs, but it seems like they're a reified version of somebody's life.
Yes.
And so, if you think of Shanti Deva, maybe when he was shunned by all the monks and he had to be isolated, and then even in your life, you went to Tibet. I'm sure that things weren't very easy for you at that point, in Italy and France. And so, it's like, in trying to look at some of this, to make, in that personalizing it, that sometimes that gets lost in the reification of things.
Yeah.
And so, that's just kind of...
Right. I think that relates very much to what Tanya was saying. When you make somebody into a hero, the humanity of what they had to go through and the actual thing of what they did, as you mentioned, that woman who climbed up, was it in South Carolina and took down the Confederate flag? Yeah.
She was going to be shot or whatever, but she did it.
Yeah, she did it.
And so even with Martin Luther King, that the beloved community continues and expands. So there is that there is that beauty in that, but again, to think in that, maybe in that double level, that that work there, but the humanness of each of us. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what I'm taking from what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, for me too, it's the dependent and rising nature of the whole thing. Because we go back to that police officer that you introduced before we talked about Martin Luther King on Monday,
Mm.
who had, stood up in 1898 or whatever year that was. The King was a brilliant, phenomenal human being who came into prominence on the tide of
Many other people. Yeah.
Other people who stood up too.
Yeah.
And when he stood up, hundreds of thousands of people stood up with him. Otherwise, there would have been no movement.
Mhm.
This also is like huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So to really, you're saying also, who history remembers depends a lot on the circumstances in which they lived, because King was the right person at the right time in the situation, and he was only able to do it because, as most great leaders say, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. So because so many other people had stood up before, and maybe weren't noticed, or were noticed just in a tiny way. Yeah. So about these hagiographies, I was thinking that when we usually hear about Atisha or Shantarakshita, for example, or even what's the Chinese Shrasang. We usually hear about them bringing the Dharma to a new place, and so rejoice that they brought the Dharma to a new place. But it's only when I really think about what they had to go through to bring the Dharma there, that's when you really see them as human beings who went through difficulties for the benefit of others. When you think of Shrasang having to go across the Gobi Desert and across the Karakoram Mountains and go into into India with all the bacteria and everything, and walk from place to place, not knowing the language, turning up at these monasteries and people going, "Who in the world are you?" And all the people in these different places spoke so many different languages. He didn't speak the languages. When I really think of what he went to, even on a physical level, and, it took years for him to get from China to Tibet. It wasn't, like we get on a plane. So, when you really think of that, and then bringing all these things back, and probably a lot of people going, "What in the world are you doing? This is total nonsense. We believe in Confucius, we believe in Mencius. Why are you bringing back this other stuff? And nobody can understand it anyway." He probably got some flack, but we don't necessarily hear about that in the biographies. And when I think of Shantarakshita and Atisha also, going from India to Tibet, that's no easy trip. Yeah, that's not easy, especially several centuries ago, when there wasn't a clear path and when there's snow and avalanches and bandits and who knows what else. Yeah, and that they were both very well-respected leaders, and pandits in their own right, probably lived very comfortably for what you have at that time, but how they gave up living, in a way that was very comfortable for them, with people that understood their life and spoke their own language, to walk over the mountains to go into Tibet, where the Tibetans were pretty uncivilized. Yeah. At the time, it was really Buddhism that was a very civilizing force on the Tibetans, and that they gave up their position to go and spread the Dharma like that. And so that too I find inspiring, and it was only when I really thought about my own teachers, Lama Yeshe and Zopa Rinpoche, and that they could have been living very happily in the Tibetan community, even though, you know, when I met the Dharma, the Tibetan community was very poor, you know, but they could have lived happily there with their own people and people who understood and everything like that. But they chose to come to the West with these quite barbarian, weird people, you know, who are very arrogant, who think that, you know, their modern technology and modern science is the best thing, and that they're going to reinterpret Buddhism to find out the real way Buddhism is supposed to be practiced. You know, that what they had to give up to come and teach in the West. So only when I really thought about that I really saw in a much more human way what they had gone through. You know, first becoming refugees, then coming to the West, and so on. So we don't always, with many people who do wonderful things, we don't always know all of the condition behind their lives, you know, and what they had to overcome to do what they did.
Even a story from Tisha going to find Sri Lanka.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The Tisha going to find Sri Lanka is very inspiring. In a way, the fact that there were sea monsters and it was made somehow magical, for me, takes the drama out of what he had to go through to sail from Bengal to Sumatra. Yeah. And how scary that must have been. Mm-hmm.
Compassion, I think that's the key for me when I hear all that, because I mean, the masters themselves don't speak about how they develop compassion. I mean, it's like saying I have developed compassion. That's how I had to go through.
Yeah.
But when you get a little bit out of it, like, you know, you hear somebody how he or she worked with her mind, then you get a real connection. Because
Yeah.
if you're already practicing yourself and starting to, you know, get into what is compassion, how does it feel like?
Yeah.
Totally understand.
Yeah. So it's the difference between hearing the story of somebody who's already developed compassion and hearing the story of somebody who's struggling like you're struggling to try and develop it. Yeah. Yeah.
So with Atisha also, I think that, you know, just imagine him going, I'm never going to see my homeland again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to die in some place that I don't even know what's going to happen to me. So you're kind of personalizing that, thinking about these great people kind of makes it very real.
Yeah, what it was like to do that. Actually, the abbot of Vikramasila made them promise to bring Atisha back in 3 years. And the translator was in the process of bringing him back, but there was a war, so they couldn't get through. So that's why Atisha wound up staying for so long. But definitely upon his not being able to get back, then he really had to say, yeah, I'm never going to see my family, I'm never going to see, you know, my homeland, da-da-da-da-da, again. And I'm here with all these people. I'd love to know more about Atisha's life. You know, the fact that they asked him not to give ordination. What was going on, you know? So, yeah, anyway, that's a whole other subject. Yeah. But, you know, what he had to deal with as a great master with, you know, different things that disciples did. His famous cook. Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to get clear. It's compassion what makes us understand what Martin Luther King did. That's compassion we could see and feel. But the compassion what Adisha did, or Tsongkhapa, how they developed all those skills, they had to go through compassion. Mm-hmm. We have to think hard and practice their teachings to be able to get to that level of compassion, and then we would be able to cry for sure, because we realized how much they had to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah.